The studio lights were soft but deliberate muted blue backlights cast an even glow over the sleek, minimalistic set. The chairs were tall, uncomfortable looking, but polished just enough to remind the guests that this wasn't a place for comfort. 5 seats, 4 guests already mic'd up, one host flipping cue cards and sipping lukewarm coffee he'd never finish. A quiet hum of production filled the background. It felt controlled, predictable, safe. Seated third from the left was Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett, navy blue blazer, hair pulled back, hands resting calmly in her lap. She hadn't spoken since sound check. She didn't need to. She was observing, listening, calculating. From the outside, it looked like just another roundtable, but Jasmine knew better. People tuning in from their living rooms thought they were watching another surface-level political segment. No one, not the host, not the panelists, not even the viewers at home, knew that the woman sitting quietly in chair 3 was holding something that would crack the broadcast in half. Across from Jasmine sat Melania Trump, poised, elegant, practiced. Her dress was flawless, her posture regal, her expression smooth, controlled. She answered questions the way a pianist plays scales with memorized precision and polished detachment. Every tough question from the host received the same treatment: a small smile, a gentle shrug, a charming pivot. She had done this before, countless times. But tonight, something was off. Maybe it was the way she never looked directly at Jasmine. Maybe it was the brief glance at the folder in Jasmine's lap. Maybe it was just the feeling, the kind that crawls up your spine when a storm is close but hasn't struck yet. The camera cut between them, Melania composed like a porcelain sculpture. Jasmine still and sharp-eyed like a fuse waiting to be lit. The contrast was impossible to ignore. One woman had spent years perfecting the art of not being cornered. The other, she was quietly preparing to corner her. It wasn't loud, it wasn't sudden, but it stopped the room cold. Jasmine Crockett leaned forward just a few inches, not enough to seem aggressive, just enough to shift the air. The motion itself was quiet, but it carried weight. Her hands were still folded, her eyes didn't waver. But the message was clear: I'm done waiting. The host blinked, sensing something. Melania shifted in her chair just slightly. And then Jasmine spoke. Her voice was calm, steady, but it cut through the room like glass. Let's stop pretending some people get a free pass just because of who they married. No one moved. No one breathed. It was as if the oxygen had been pulled from the studio. The silence wasn't awkward, it was electric. It was the sound of power being challenged by someone who had nothing left to lose. Jasmine didn't rush. She reached into her bag, not with flair, but with finality. What came out wasn't just paper. It was a story, a pattern, a map of silence. She placed the folder on the table, unclipped the tab, and began sliding pages forward one by one. Slow, measured, intentional. These, she said, her tone still calm, are transaction logs, offshore account filings, and a report from an abandoned investigation in upstate New York. She looked straight at the moderator, then slowly turned to face Melania. Each one of these is tied to shell companies, and every single one connects to your name. The air in the studio felt thinner. The host glanced down at his cue cards helpless. The panelists were frozen. And Melania, she stared at the documents. Her eyes flicked over the names, the numbers, the stamp from a court in Syracuse. She opened her mouth, then closed it. For the first time, her smile didn't come. And for the first time, she looked cornered. The camera zoomed in, slow, deliberate, capturing Melania's face just as her eyes faltered. It was subtle, but it was real. A single flicker, a rare crack in the porcelain. Her posture remained upright, but her gaze drifted first to the folder, then to Jasmine, then to nothing at all. The host sat frozen, mouth slightly open, as if waiting for someone, anyone, to save the moment. No one did. Behind the glass, the producers scrambled. One assistant slid a note onto the table. Another frantically waved for a camera change. But it was too late. Across the country, viewers had already started recording. Phones lit up. Clips clipped. Screenshots snapped. And within minutes, hashtags exploded. Hashtag Crockett's v. Melania. Hashtag Jasmine has receipts. She brought the files. A moment of silence inside the studio had become a roar outside of it. Melania finally spoke. Her voice was soft, almost too soft, but it carried a sharp edge coated in practiced outrage. "This is clearly a political attack," she said. "I won't engage in baseless conspiracy theories." She gave the host a look, half plea, half warning. Her smile returned, but it didn't reach her eyes. The moderator, still stiff, tried to respond, but before he could speak, Jasmine did. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look rattled. She simply lifted her hand, gestured to the papers on the table, and said without a blank, "It's not a theory if it's backed by court records and banking logs." The room went still again. Even the lights seemed to pause. That wasn't politics. That was evidence. And for the first time, Melania Trump had no elegant way to pivot. 3 days before the live broadcast, Jasmine Crockett sat in a corner booth at a diner just outside Fort Worth, Texas. The kind of place where the coffee was cheap, the waitresses called you hun, and the jukebox in the corner hadn't changed its playlist since 1998. Her aide, Kenny Rowe, sat across from her, his tie loosened, eyes tired. The early morning sunlight cut across the table, hitting the edge of the manila folder in Jasmine's hands. She wasn't hungry. She hadn't even touched the toast on her plate. She was flipping through pages again. Kenny lowered his voice. "This isn't just political, Jazz, it's Melania Trump. You go forward with this, and they'll come for you hard." Jasmine didn't look up. She turned another page. Highlighted wire transfers. A redacted affidavit, a name. Then she said it, calm, measured. "I'm not starting a fire, Kenny. I'm showing people it's already burning." Kenny exhaled, leaned back, and rubbed his eyes. He knew her too well to argue. What she was about to do wasn't strategy, it was conviction. Jasmine Crockett didn't grow up in the halls of privilege. She was raised in South Dallas, where cracked sidewalks ran longer than promises, and most kids knew how to read police sirens before they could read Shakespeare. There were no family connections, no legacy scholarships, just a mother who worked 2 jobs and a grandmother who prayed over the bills every Sunday night. Jasmine learned early that being smart wasn't enough. You had to be louder, sharper, unshakable. She put herself through law school 1 shift at a time. Public defender by day, bar prep by night. She defended people who couldn't afford silence, people the system had already decided were guilty. In those courtrooms, she saw the same pattern repeat. The poor got punishment. The rich got protection. That's when she made a vow, quiet but permanent. "I grew up in a place where silence kills the truth. So I made a choice. I would never be quiet again." Years later, she won a seat in Congress, not because she was polished, but because she was relentless. And that fire, it hadn't dimmed. It was just waiting for the right match. Jasmine wasn't naive. She knew what would come. The backlash wouldn't be subtle. The headlines would spin. The networks would call her emotional. The pundits would question her mental stability. And the whispers, they'd be louder than ever. She's reckless, she's angry, she's ruining her own career. But Jasmine had heard it all before. That was the price of speaking truth when you weren't invited to speak in the first place. She stared at her reflection in the diner's window, the folder still in her lap. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "They always call us angry until they can't." Kenny didn't say anything. He didn't have to, because in that moment he understood something crystal clear. She wasn't doing this because it was smart. She was doing it because it was right, and right comes with a cost. It started with a simple question, one asked by a 24-year-old intern named Troy Whitman. He was digging through old archives, double-checking Melania Trump's early timeline, and something didn't add up. She said she moved to the U.S. full-time in 1996, he told Jasmine, but here's a patent application she filed in Zurich, dated 1998. Jasmine leaned in. Troy slid the document across the desk. It was for jewelry designs, vague, generic, but real, and it carried a Swiss registration number and a signature, Melania Knaus. That wasn't the problem. The problem was that her public statements and her immigration paperwork said she had already been living in the U.S. full-time. Running a design business from Switzerland in 1998 would have required work permits, disclosures, but nothing existed in official records. And then there were the companies, 3 of them, registered across Liechtenstein, Zurich, and one in Panama. None of them ever disclosed on public financial filings, no press mentions, no interviews. Just silent traces buried behind layers of shell corporations. "It's like she vanished in plain sight," Jasmine said quietly, and no one ever asked why. The file was thin, only 12 pages, no title on the cover, just a date, June 17, 2011. And a location, Syracuse, New York. Rodney Klein, a retired paralegal from the U.S. Attorney's Office, slid it across his kitchen table. "This wasn't supposed to vanish," he said, but someone made sure it did. Inside a memo referencing a woman named McNaus, an old alias of Melania Knaus before she changed her legal name. The memo outlined a suspected money funneling scheme, small real estate purchases, rapid resales, and offshore transfers that didn't match declared income. The federal inquiry had barely started when something strange happened. The key witness vanished. Her name was Lydia Korchi, a Slovenian-born accountant who had been quietly cooperating with the IRS under a temporary visa program. She had a meeting scheduled for July 2nd. She never showed up. Her apartment was found empty the next morning. No flight logs, no passport scans, no phone activity. Gone. The case was labeled inactive and closed for insufficient supporting testimony. Jasmine stared at the last page. Typed in fading ink at the bottom. Subject's disappearance remains unresolved. No further inquiry planned. She whispered almost to herself, "They didn't just bury the case, they buried her with it." For years, Melania Trump's name had been attached to charity, children's health, women's empowerment, anti-bullying. It was always soft, elegant, and untraceable. Jasmine wasn't looking for a scandal. She was looking for receipts. What she found were 6 charitable foundations, all registered under variations of the M. Knaus or Melania T. brand. The names were public. The missions sounded noble. But the money, that's where the trail went cold. No disbursements, no beneficiary reports, no tax-exempt activity. Just vague filings, recycled mission statements, and wire transfers. Lots of wire transfers. Jasmine followed them. One led to a consultancy firm in Miami which had no employees, no office, and one bank account that sent money straight to a shell company in the British Virgin Islands. Another went to a literacy grant in New Mexico, but the registered address was an abandoned gas station. She gathered the invoices, cross-checked every routing number, then printed them one by one. It wasn't a charity, Jasmine told Kenny. It was a cover. The first email came at 3:12 a.m. No subject line. No sender. Just one sentence, push further, and disappear like the last one. Jasmine read it twice, then deleted nothing. She forwarded it to Kenny. No caption, no panic, just truth. 6 hours later, a flash drive arrived in a plain manila envelope. No note, no return address. Inside, a video. It was grainy, shaky, clearly filmed from inside a car. The footage, Jasmine walking to her car after a late meeting. Alone. A slow zoom from across the street. Headlights off. Window cracked. Then a voice barely audible under the static. She's getting close. Let's make sure she knows we're watching. Jasmine watched the video twice, then looked at Kenny. They're not just afraid I'll speak, she said. They're afraid I already did. The counterattack came fast. Within 24 hours of the video going viral, right-wing media had its talking points locked and loaded. Jasmine was no longer a congresswoman. She was now a dangerous agitator. A race-baiting conspiracy theorist. An angry black woman with a personal vendetta. They ran old clips edited out of context. They mocked her tone, her hair, her words. They didn't challenge her evidence, they challenged her existence. But Jasmine had expected this. She'd seen the playbook. Hell, she'd been targeted by it before. This wasn't about her truth being wrong. It was about making sure no one trusted her to tell it. But facts? Facts don't flinch. Facts don't shout. Facts don't come with a press team, but they survive spin. And the documents on that table, they didn't care about opinion polls. They didn't know what party she belonged to. They just told the story, and they didn't lie. The room was too quiet. 5 senior members of Jasmine's own party sat across the long table, surrounded by neutral walls and coffee cups gone cold. They didn't yell, they didn't threaten, they used softer weapons, tone, implication, and the word optics. You've made your point, Congresswoman, one said. But we're hearing from donors who feel this escalation hurts the party. You're shifting the narrative, another added, and not in a direction that benefits anyone long-term. What they meant was clear. You're making too many powerful people uncomfortable. You're costing us control. You're making the wrong kind of noise. Jasmine didn't flinch. She folded her hands. Then said what none of them were ready for. If you want safe heroes, you picked the wrong woman. Silence. They looked at each other, then back at her as if realizing too late that Jasmine hadn't come to ask permission. She had come to refuse to be silent. The camera panned across the room. 1, 2, 3 chairs, and then the 4th. Empty. No nameplate, no representative. Just silence and a microphone that would never be used. Melania Trump was officially summoned to testify before the Oversight Committee. She declined. No explanation, no statement, just nothing. The media spun it 1,000 ways. Some said it was legal strategy. Some said it was fear. But Jasmine didn't care what excuse the headlines offered. She stood alone at the front of the chamber, no speech in hand, no rehearsed monologue, only a few sheets of paper and a truth that no longer needed fireworks. This isn't about her, she said, calm and steady. It's about power, about who gets held accountable and who gets to disappear when the heat turns up. The camera lingered again on the empty chair, and somehow it spoke louder than any words ever could. The session was nearly over. Staffers were packing up notes. Cameras dimmed. People assumed the show was done. But then, from the far corner of the public gallery, a woman stood up slowly. No fanfare, no shouting, just presence. She walked down the aisle between rows of chairs toward Jasmine and slipped a plain beige envelope into her hand. No words, just a look that said, "You need to see this." Jasmine opened it right there. 6 scanned receipts, all dated within the past 4 years, all from the same charitable foundation bearing Melania Trump's name. Each transaction claimed to support children's shelters, veterans housing, women's clinics. But at the bottom of each form, in red ink from internal audits, were the same 5 words: no distribution to listed recipients. 6 donations. 0 outcomes. Jasmine didn't need to shout. She simply turned to the committee, raised the envelope slightly, and said, "It never went where it claimed to go. Not once." It didn't happen slowly. It happened all at once. Within hours of the committee hearing, hashtags like #JusticeWithJasmine and #MelaniaReceipts were trending in every major U.S. city. Clips of the empty chair, the envelope reveal, and Jasmine's steady voice looped endlessly across TikTok, YouTube, and cable news. CNN called her a reckoning long overdue. MSNBC ran the headline, "Crockett confronts the First Lady's silence and wins." Even Fox News had to pivot. They labeled her relentless and surprisingly factual. But the most unexpected twist came from the very networks that once mocked her. One by one, anchors who dismissed her as emotional or irrelevant now ran montages of her past speeches, rewriting their own narratives. And amid the viral swell, a single question echoed louder than any headline. If she were anyone else, white male, wealthy, would we have looked sooner? The avalanche had begun, and it wasn't just burying lies. It was unearthing the ugly truths we'd learned to ignore. They started arriving the next morning. Some were typed. Most were handwritten, folded neatly, smudged with fingerprints or tear stains. Some came in envelopes with floral patterns. Others were scribbled on old receipts, napkins, anything within reach. Hundreds. Then thousands. Letters from strangers, from Wisconsin, Georgia, the Bronx, from retired teachers, truck drivers, social workers, teenagers, from grandmothers who hadn't spoken in decades, from survivors who had never told a soul. One woman wrote in shaky cursive, "20 years ago, I stayed silent. I thought no one would believe me. But your voice made me believe again." Another said, "You didn't just expose her, you exposed a system that kept us all quiet." And one letter mailed from El Paso arrived in a simple brown envelope with no return address. Inside just one sentence written in bold black ink, "You gave truth a seat at the table again." Jasmine read each one slowly, sometimes aloud, sometimes in silence, holding the pages to her chest like scripture. She never expected a reward. She certainly didn't expect strangers to call her family. But in those letters, she heard something she hadn't felt in years: resonance. The kind that makes you realize the truth, no matter how dangerous, can still echo through the right hearts. In the end, it wasn't about Melania, not really. Sure, the files were damning, the missing money, the shady transactions, the unanswered questions. But the real story, the one people remembered, wasn't about guilt. It was about courage. It was about the moment one woman on live national television looked power in the eye and refused to blink. She didn't yell, she didn't rant, she didn't throw accusations like darts in the dark. She opened a folder, she spoke calmly, and she let the silence around her prove everything. It reminded America of something we had forgotten. Truth doesn't always scream. Sometimes it just shows up with receipts. The headlines faded. The networks moved on. But in community centers, in classrooms, in whispered conversations behind closed doors, people kept talking about her. Not because she exposed Melania, but because she exposed something in us. That we still get quiet when powerful people talk. That we still hesitate when it's inconvenient to question. That we still wait for permission to tell the truth. And then someone like Jasmine Crockett comes along and breaks the silence without asking. And in that break, we all hear what really matters. She didn't say much in her final interview. The cameras were off, the makeup removed, the studio empty. Just Jasmine and the hum of a recorder on a desk between them. When asked what she hoped people would remember, she smiled just a little. Then she said quietly, but without hesitation, "They built the system on silence. But all it takes is one voice to start the crack." She leaned back, folded her hands, and looked straight ahead. No anger, no bravado, just truth. And now she added, "They know who's watching." That was it. No mic drop, no closing anthem. Just the echo of something real, the kind of truth that doesn't fade when the screen goes dark. Truth isn't always loud. Sometimes it walks into a room, quietly sits down, and speaks with calm conviction. This story reminded us that the systems we live in, political, social, even personal, are often held together by one thing: silence. But silence is not peace. It's just the pause before someone brave decides enough is enough. Jasmine Crockett didn't break the system. She broke the silence. And sometimes that's all it takes to begin real change. So if you ever feel too small to make a difference, remember this: you don't have to be loud, you just have to be clear. If stories like this move you, if you believe truth should never be silenced, then don't just watch, be part of something bigger. Click subscribe to AZ Exposed, where we uncover the hidden, amplify the unheard, and never stop asking the hard questions. Because the more of us that listen, the less they can ignore.